Welcome, everybody, to Event Marketing Redefined. As always, thank you for taking time out of your day to come to us and talk about event marketing. Today, I have Joe Federbush. He is the president of EVOLIO Marketing. They are event marketing strategy and measurement. It's that simple. And today we're talking data, we're talking measurement, we're talking strategy and driving results at your trade shows and your events. Joe, welcome. Thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me, Matt. Great to see everyone, hear from everyone. Glad you're here.
Awesome. So just quick start is Joe will be speaking at Exhibitor Live in Louisville this weekend. I know a lot of you here will be at Exhibitor. For some of you who do not know what Exhibitor Live is, you should check it out. You should check out the CTSM program and pretty much what the whole event is about. It's called Exhibitor Live this weekend in Louisville. So Joe, good luck. Good luck speaking.
Thanks. Appreciate it.
You got it. All right, let's start. Joe, tell me a little bit about what are the benefits of using data-driven strategies in exhibits and events? What are some basic benefits?
Yeah, I think the biggest benefit overall is, feelings aren't facts, and having data to really support decisions is super key, especially as, I think most of us, if not all of us, no one's throwing money at our event marketing programs right now. So we have to really justify what we're doing and make every dollar not work as $2, but pretty much work as $10. And when you have data to back decisions, to make decisions, you're in a much better spot than just saying, I feel ... and I think ...
I like that. It's kind of like, I think about, you said feelings aren't facts, right? So having data backing up what you're doing at your events, we talk a lot on this show, and I have talked about adjustments. When you are a true event marketer, when you have a event marketing program, that embodies a lot of different things, or let's just say trade show. I mean, you should be evolving. You should be changing. You should be adapting. And I think that is a big piece in helping you make decisions, like you said, as to where, why, and how.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, with data, you definitely have that continuous improvement protocol that, we all need. We can't get stuck in the let's just do what we did last year mode, because things have been shifting and changing quite a bit, obviously since 2019 into the pandemic, and now returning from the pandemic with, we have a lot of challenges we're facing with pricing, with staffing, with resources, with outsourcing, you name it. So when we can do things more efficiently because we have data to help, make those pivots and stuff, you're in a much better spot.
How do you specifically at EVOLIO, right? How are you leveraging data to create strategies for companies?
Yeah, great question, Matt. So, with some companies, it's chicken and egg. It's like, well, we need data to create a strategy. In other companies, we need a strategy to then start measuring outcomes. Let's take the first example. So, developing a strategy, then you're going to use the data to help refine and, stay on course or improve, all that good stuff. And I think strategy just comes down to asking the right questions, starting internally, talking to your internal stakeholders, executives, sales, marketing, procurement, you name it, different lines of businesses, however your company is set up. But start asking questions, almost like creating, whether you have an internal focus groups or conducting interviews, but create a discussion guide with 5 or 6 questions that you're going to ask everyone across the board. What's the perception of events? How do you feel we're doing with our event approach? What do you think our competition's doing better? How can we improve? And then most importantly, what are your top 5 objectives for investing in events and exhibits? Ask those questions across the board, internal stakeholders, and use that to really become the foundation and the basis of your strategy moving forward. Because most of the time, salespeople are going to say, well, our goal is sales, and marketing is going to say brand, and executives are going to say ROI. But if you pull it all together, now you have a compelling story to say, okay, we heard 5 times that ROI is the most important objective. So what's our ROI strategy? We heard 3 times brand is our most important objective. What's our brand strategy? And then, of course, how do you build and design that experience and that exhibit to execute on it.
So two things you said there that I want to bring up. One is, I love you said strategy is asking the right questions and internally. Talked about this on my last show, which is for event marketers who are handed event marketing programs. We'll stick to trade show. It's just the easy way is
Yeah.
start asking the why, start asking the who, start asking about the engagement. So I really like that piece. Tell me the second. So with data on the other side, tell me just like loosely, what are some of the data points, data types, like specific things that you're looking at and using to guide strategy specifically?
Yeah. So even before you even start measuring, you're still in that strategy phase. We look at it. So now you've determined and identified your objectives internally. So now you go externally to each of those show organizers and say, hey, here's our objectives for this show. And here's how our target audience is defined. What percentage of your attendees represent our target audience? And when you define your target audience, the best thing you could do as an exhibitor is go to the attendee registration form and look at how the show is classifying their attendees. So rather than you saying, well, we want to reach these people and these people, maybe that doesn't align with the way the show is, registering people, use the attendee registration as your guidelines for audience targeting. So you could go back to the organizer and say, don't just sell me concrete, don't just sell me space. Sell me why I should be in your show. And it's not that you're against being in the show, but once you can start with understanding the size of your target, what's their decision-making role, what's their job titles, their job levels, industries they represent, all of that good stuff, then you could start calculating and curating what your investment level will be. And then taking it one step further to understanding the audiences, what percentage of the audience is like strategic versus tactical? So let's say director and above titles are strategic, below directors are tactical. And think about what that means from the experience that you're going to deliver in your booth. Whether your booth is 10 by 10 or 100 by 100, it really doesn't matter. The same principles apply. Are we staffed, and do we have a booth narrative that speaks to both the technical and that strategic audience? Give you a perfect example, like an executive walks into your booth. Do you think they really want to see a demo? Like how your software works or a machine works? No, they're going to want to know, how is your software or your machine going to save my company money? Very complete different conversations. So that's kind of like on that external strategic side.
So strategic and tactical in terms of separating attendees. I've not heard that before. It's excellent. It's perfect, right?
Yeah.
I think I gave an example a couple of weeks back in a show. I had a friend of a friend. Their company was exhibiting. I was at the show. I stopped by, went over to the booth. We got to having like a happy hour beer. We were talking. I was there for an hour and a half, right? And we're just talking. And I mean, nice booth, well done. 4 demo stands in the booth. I didn't see a single person at the demo stand for an hour and a half. I just asked, I said, hey, why do you guys have these demo stands? And they're like, oh, well, we don't really use them. This is really more for our executives. I was like, well, what are you doing with them? Why do you, and it's interesting. I love the separation in those two, right? So for people listening, that data can help you formulate that. And even if you don't have data, like you should know your audience and segment market at a show. And that's basically telling you, like, understand who these people are and then how that experience has to drive to them. Because you're right. An executive doesn't want the demo. They just don't.
Yeah, less likely for sure. And the thing is, you haven't even really started measuring yet using that technique. You've done your due diligence with the show organizer who's saying, hey, you should be in my show. So, it's like you're starting the whole process with a foundation of basic data. That's who's the audience and how many represent my targets. Because think about it, there could be 10,000 people at a show. And if you determine that 2,000 people represent your target, that your booth size, your number of staff, your marketing, your promotion, pre, during, post event, that's to really attract and engage the right 2,000 people. It's not to send it out to 10,000 people and see what sticks.
Yeah. Yeah. You know what else it makes me think, Joe, is we have a lot of, from working with our clients, we have questions like, should we exhibit at this show? number one. Number
Yeah.
two is, what other shows should we exhibit in, right? That's a constant question. I was listening to a podcast that I listened to that's about like enterprise SaaS marketing, demand gen, things like that. And this guy came on, asked a question on a live show kind of like this, and was talking about ChatGPT and
Yeah.
saying how he uses ChatGPT in this AI conversation, which I use it too. It blows my mind. But
Yeah.
he's asking what trade shows for A, B, and C, which live events. So I think that's always been a question for people. Which trade shows do I go to? Why do I go to them? Which ones? Are they any good? Who's the audience? So now marrying data, AI, like I just kind of put those two together from what you said and what I heard the other day. It's like, okay, that bridge is starting to get shorter, where you could figure things out if you really want to.
Oh yeah, Matt, I love that you just used that example and brought that up, because yeah, I've been all over ChatGPT since, for whatever, a couple of months now since it's exploded. And the one thing that everyone has to be aware of with ChatGPT is that it doesn't really have data past like September 2021, so trade shows were rebounding. So make sure, like, when you're using ChatGPT for data, that maybe be specific in your prompts, in your question, maybe refer back to 2019 for like some, what was the old legacy information. But yeah, like, so we have this service that we call portfolio optimization and analysis. And literally, to your point, Matt, about like, what show should I be in that I'm not in, to consider. And literally, as we get used to ChatGPT more, and you understand like how specific you have to be with your questioning, like really being specific. I was doing this for a company recently, and they're like, hey, what shows do you know about that were, represent this certain industry? And, off the top of my head, I had like 2 or 3, but then I went to ChatGPT and it listed like 12. And I sent it back to the client, and they were like, oh my God, Joe, you're amazing. And I'm like, yeah, the cat's not out of the bag yet.
That's crazy. That's cool.
But now it is.
That's really cool.
Yeah.
Well, I think there's going to be opportunity for people that want to explore those things. And it really should, like, everybody should be thinking when it comes to ChatGPT and AI, like, how can this benefit my industry? And it may, at first, you may not be like, oh, I don't know, but you have to dive into it to really start to understand where it can benefit you, where it can be of use. So,
yeah. I mean, I look at it like,
oh, good.
I was just gonna say, like, think about like the things you're Googling, and just it's so much more. Yeah, like we all Google interesting things all the time, and this just pulls it together in a story format for you, versus like showing you a bunch of websites that you have to filter through, which are sponsored content, which is legit content, etc. So yeah, but anyway, yeah, sorry, go on.
And I like that you can like have a conversation with it. Like you can just keep asking. Like I ask something, and then it gives me something. I'm like, and then I ask again and ask it, and it dials and dials and dials. It's pretty cool. It really is.
It's so cool. Yeah.
Let's talk like KPIs and goals, right? Because obviously when you have strategy, you are devising a strategy to then go implement and execute. And really what you're trying to do is begin with the end in mind and have goals that you're trying to obtain. You're just trying to get somewhere, right?
Absolutely.
So talk to me about KPIs, and specifically ones that you've seen that are common that maybe people should be benchmarking and measuring, and kind of how data folds into them.
Yeah, no, great question. So yeah, most of us, we live in KPIs. And for those, just in case you don't know what a KPI is, key performance indicator, those are the most important metrics. I know this is going to sound cliche, but I'm going to say it to say it. Just remember, every KPI is a metric, but not every metric is a KPI. All right. I think that's an important foundation to start with. And why that's important is because, we've had conversations with plenty of folks, and they're like, oh yeah, we have about 75 KPIs. And I'm like, whoa. You should have like 10 KPIs, maybe. You could have 75 metrics that you're capturing, but they have to bubble up, to be what are the most important metrics, AKA KPIs. So I think, kind of going back to what I was saying before, like starting internally, asking the right questions. But let's say you don't have that phase done, and you're just starting with the KPI phase. I think from event marketing, from exhibiting, we're a little spoiled in the fact that there's only so many KPIs out there, right? Most of us, you think about the visitor journey, right? The visitor journey starts with, I'm going to give you like 5 buckets. It starts with who's visiting, right? So demographic information, the targets, right? The key target audience, visitor type stuff. Then you get to what we call the ROX, or return on experience, KPIs. And then the return on experience, or ROX, are like, where did they go? What did they do? And how valuable was it? All right. You're setting the foundation. Then you can look at the third bucket of KPIs is like content and education. How valuable was the information that you presented, whether it was like in an in-booth theater, whether it was at your demo, whether it was at a breakout session or a keynote that maybe your executive spoke at, whatever the case is. The fourth is, now we start getting into the brand metrics. So did you change brand preference, affinity, awareness, perception? And then finally, the last KPI is what most people call ROI. We call it more demand gen. You know, are you creating demand for your product, for your solutions, for your brand? And creating demand does not always mean, are people going to buy? I mean, hopefully they do, but how much is your investment in your booth at that show with your staff and everything that you've done, those 4 other steps before the demand gen or ROI? How effective were they to get people to want to buy? And I think so many companies, they just start off with ROI as their KPI. And, you know, did we get X number of leads and how many people are going to buy? And then the $1 million question is, how are you tracking this? And, well, we scan badges and they go into a Salesforce or whatever, CRM. And then as marketers, do we ever see those Salesforce reports? Because then they're kind of like in sales hands, not in marketing hands. So, kind of like then go back and ask the questions, hey, could we see those lead reports on a regular cadence, monthly, whatever, quarterly, so we could see if those leads are converting? And then that's a somewhat loose form of ROI, but it's some form of ROI. So those are those like 5 KPI buckets. Yeah.
No, I like how you broke them out, because I think one thing it makes me think, and a question that I have for you is, so if you're like a big enterprise company or you're large, like there's there's a big difference, between like large enterprise, big companies versus kind of like, you could have a company that's $75 million in revenue that's spending $500,000 a year exhibiting or so. And they're all in on it, but they're not so large that some of that stuff would matter to them, right? It is a little more fine-tuned. What kind of data points have you seen for maybe smaller companies, or ones that when they are going to trade show that they should be looking for or tracking per se? And what I would add on that is, I'm with you on the ROI thing. You need to calculate your ROI. You have to know, like, hey, we spent this was in pipe, this is what sold, this is what, that's the end of the day, that's what matters. But the data points that come from it, you should, like the demographic, the return on experience, the content, how did people, like, you should be taking data points back with you. What was the experience like? Are you listening to your customers? Are you talking to them? What did they gravitate towards? I mean, when you're getting that face-to-face, man, you got to pay attention.
Yeah, exactly. And you're absolutely right. Not everyone can do everything based on budget, resources, booth size of program, you name it. But I do think at least, qualifying the quality of your visitors, which is the bookend on one side, and then the quality of the leads on the other bookend, those to me are the two most important things, But unfortunately, if you don't reverse engineer that process from the one bookend of ROI or demand gen, if you're not having good ROI and you're not really sure why, and you're not measuring, the experience that you're delivering, it's hard to fix it. So that's why, we do break it down into those like 5 buckets, because not all 5 buckets are applicable to everyone every time, but probably 1 to 2, maybe 3 of them will be. And I think, as you make them consistent, so if you look at, okay, here are our KPI library, so to speak, but at event A, these 2 KPIs are most important. Maybe it's just thought leadership and attracting the right people. But event B, the most important KPI could be building brand awareness and not thought leadership. So I think it's like, don't just make everything so rigid that it can't be like curated and for each individual event, but at least have that foundation of we know what we measure, how we measure it. Then it goes to like per event, what we'll measure.
I use, in line with what you're saying, I use the term all the time about business objectives. So like, what are business, not every business objective is just a sale or an ROI. It's simply just
Exactly.
not. It's a
Yeah.
piece. But, are you, as marketing and the event marketer, are you tying your efforts to business objectives? And they could be a lot of different ones to what you're saying. We got a question here from Mel, which is great. Mel is always engaged and asking really good stuff. And actually what Mel is asking, Mel and I have gone back and forth on, and he's asked questions and we've talked. And I think Mel is on the unicorn path that I am of trying to figure this out. But Mel says, how do you tactfully question a client's weak strategy, ROI, ROO, or KPIs without creating friction? Exhibitors will almost always claim to have a trade show strategy, but the strategy is often insufficient or flawed. So, Mel, this is a great question. This is a bit of a nut that I am trying to crack. And I think it's on multiple levels. I actually would push in a direction on this and tell you that there's some people who don't even claim it. They just simply don't care. They don't even claim it. They basically say like, oh, we go because we go. Oh, we have to go. We've actually had a company say, oh, well, we have to support the doctors. We don't get anything from it, but we go. So I don't know how you tactfully do it. I think it is about trying to explain and hold your ground that there's more there. It's not overly complicated either. I think when you start talking to people about measurement and ROI, ROO, KPIs, the marketer is like, whoa. If they're not being asked to do this by their CEO or their CMO or their VP of marketing, they're like, why are you giving me more work? So I think it comes down to how motivated is your event marketer. Some are extremely motivated and they want that conversation. Some don't. But I don't know if you have a better answer than I do, Joe, because I don't have an answer for this yet.
No, you're on point. I mean, you're absolutely on point, Matt. Yeah, it's a little easier for me to answer that because, I'm not the exhibit house or agency, right? We're like this kind of like independent third party. So we're a little spoiled in that respect where like, that's what we do. Like, we don't have to deal with a lot of the other stuff indirectly. Yeah, we definitely do though. And indirectly, how we do it is anyone, any exhibit house agency, you're a partner to your client, right? You're not just like I&D, and you're not just like, designing a booth and, what is it? Throw up and shut up, show up and throw up and show up, or shut up, whatever. But the thing is, I think it's such a valid question to ask your clients to be like, hey, we've been working together for a while. We hope you're happy with us, but we'd love to chat with you about like refresh on what's your strategy, what's your KPIs, so that we can help ensure that we're delivering it and that you're delivering it to protect your job, to protect your budget, to protect your program, and to deliver client delight and success, customer success. So it's like it's almost like, don't make it about me or you. Let's make it about more than us. And Joe, these things don't magically happen.
No, they certainly don't. I have a thought here as I'm reading Mel's question, because I think it's a great question, Mel. And as I'm listening to you and talking through this, and I've been thinking about this for a while, I was reading something, my buddy Jonathan Kazarian, he was a guest on the show. He's the CEO of Excel Events, and he polled a bunch of event agencies, right? So not exactly, exhibit houses or experience company, the names go all over the place now, but essentially same thing. And it was fascinating, the information he posted about it on LinkedIn the other day. But what I've been thinking is this: I think there's a lot of companies that they don't hire a real event marketer for the position to run the trade show program. They put somebody who doesn't have the experience in the place, and then they don't give that person the resources. So they're putting them in a bad position. So you're taking a marketer who's probably young, talented, or just showed up, and they're like, hey, here's the trade show program. By the way, I have no way of training you on event marketing. You've never done anything in high level event marketing. Oh, and by the way, I'm not going to hold you accountable to KPIs with this event marketing program. Just make sure that we get there and the booth looks good. I think that's a lot of what goes on in the majority versus the minority. But my point of this is that I am seeing a big shift in digital is so saturated. And now that we're coming out of COVID, the stats that I've started to see is that companies are moving money from digital marketing to live events, to the in-person, to events. And I think now executives, now VPs of marketing are going to start paying attention. Whoa. We spend 500 grand this quarter on trade shows. What's happening? What's the goals? What's the initiatives? What's the outcome? What's coming back to us? Because I think a lot, when everybody was fat and happy in 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, right in that space, nobody was asking. So that's kind of what I've seen is I see a lot of people, because we work with them. We have some clients that are just incredible. They're talented. They know they've done it. And then we have some people that are just in a bad spot. They don't, they're kind of put in a tough positions. That's just kind of a thought that I've been working through and trying to understand here.
Yeah. Well, and I think, the beauty is digital and in person complement each other so well when done well. And I think like 2020, 2021, et cetera, we would, for the first time, drowning in data because everything went digital, not by choice. So we knew clicks and like visits and this and duration, and we never had so much data in our life, but no one was, I don't know that many people that were making really good strategic decisions on it. They just had cool dashboards. So we were drowning in data, drowning in dashboards, but not necessarily having decision-making data. But I do think the beauty of digital gets to extend that shelf life of the in-person. So you could create like a lot of digital excitement prior to the event, incorporate that same digital to keep that consistent branding during the event, and then extend the shelf life post-event, continue that conversation going. But that's a true integrated strategy. Like that, again, it's not just going to be like, okay, because I use the same graphic before, during, and after, so that's my digital strategy. That's just basic stuff. But how do you think about that whole like loop of like getting people excited so they visit you, then you continue the dialogue afterwards, you get them to follow you on social media, and you continue that story about why your brand or your client's brand kicks butt so well.
I like that. And I think for me, just to clarify, when I'm talking digital, I'm talking about people that are like running ads and Google AdWords and Facebook ads and things. I'm seeing that money shift. I think the digital side, when it comes to events, is a huge complement to live. And I think they run parallel. I love that. We have another question, which is great. I love getting questions here. It's my favorite part of the show. So we'll, when we get them, we take them. Joe, here, I'll read this to you. It says, can you talk a bit about measuring brand awareness engagement? It's always part of our goals, but difficult to measure.
Yeah, absolutely, Allison. So we look at brand awareness, brand perception, all of the good brand metrics. We look at that. You're not going to believe me, but I promise you this is true. That's the easiest thing to measure, and yet it's the least tangible. And it's simply done, like super simply done by, of course, asking the right questions, but it's the methodology that matters. So for example, any booth that's like typically, let's say 20 by 20 or larger, the best way to capture brand awareness, perception, affinity type metrics is just an exit survey. So as people leave your exhibit, do a quick survey, capture basic demographics, who they are, that stuff like that. That's strategic versus tactical position. So the difference for segmentation, but then say, hey, as a result of visiting XYZ's booth today, rate your level of agreement with the following statements, and have some of those messaging statements that the brand was trying to communicate through digital, through staff, through signage, through demonstrations and presentations. Ask another question around like brand awareness, for example, by visiting the exhibit, are you more likely, how much more knowledgeable are you about this brand? As a result of your visit, are you more likely to purchase, or follow us on social media as a result of your visit? So it really starts getting into like some of those true brand awareness, preference, affinity type questions. From the second part of your question around brand engagement, so, that we look at from the perspective of like, okay, did you speak with any reps during your time did you visit Someone's knocking on my door. I'm in a hotel. Anyway, so did you speak with reps during your visit, and how effective and informative was the information that they shared with you? So that gives you a sense of the quality of engagement that was happening in addition to the awareness. Hopefully that helps. Does that make sense, or any follow-up question to that, Allison?
No, I think Allison could pop in the chat, but I think Allison and Mel, those are great questions and getting us off and running here. I love that. Joe, I love what you said about brand awareness, exit survey. And then the one thing I caught on what you said was about, are you resonating with this messaging? You know what I mean? Like, how well do you resonate with A, B, and C? And I think what's fascinating is I posted about this the other day on LinkedIn, and I wrote about graphics and narrative and your statements and what you're saying at trade shows and your events, and I think it's interesting, the messaging, positioning, and the story that people tell inside their trade show booths. I think it gets lost because people use way too much copy, way too much content, way too much everything. It's like, hey, don't give me your life story. Just tell me A, B, and C. So that's fascinating to me. Like, how is this resonating? Do you agree with this? Am I catching you with that? I like that a lot.
And the best thing is test it on yourself. Like, be honest and open with yourself. Read it from the visitor's perspective. And does it make sense? Is it compelling? Is it too much jargon? Going back to the ChatGPT example that we talked about before, I've used it to help create, and I'll say, like, in the question, create a one-line statement about why I should like this brand. And then I'll, give a brand description, and it literally can create a one-line description of, like, what's the hook, what's the catch, to get me to, like, even want to listen to understand more about your brand.
Joe, is there anything, to Allison's questions got me thinking a little bit. Is there anything to that where maybe, obviously, depending how big the company is, how big the brand, how big the reach, everybody's different, right? So is there something they could track, essentially like website traffic, impressions on social things with campaigns that they've run, right? Like, I would imagine if you're a pretty big company and you're in a very big industry, say it's a CES and you're a big company and you go to CES, and you're running this whole campaign and you're exhibiting and you're doing all these activations and trade show booth, like, I would want to look every single year at my website traffic for maybe the 2 weeks prior CES and the 2 weeks post CES. And that to me would give me some form of, like, are we gaining traction? Are we getting impressions?
The digital metrics are key. Do you see those bumps after milestone activities? So whether you did like a big pre-show promotion and direct people to a landing page, or post-event, or they even just go into your homepage if it's not like, a specific landing type page. But do you see those bumps in traffic, in impressions on social media, likes, things like that? Absolutely.
Allison said it does make sense. So apparently you gave her a good answer, Joe. She said that, logistically, exit surveys are tricky. They take time. Do you incentivize participation in exit surveys and things of that nature to get the data?
Yeah, when you can, and when budgets prevail. So in healthcare, you can't really, and even in military and defense, you just really can't and cannot and shouldn't. So it's just more by doing it professionally, and you're absolutely right, Allison, about it does take time and staff, and it's definitely a coordinated effort. What we see is that those who are measuring, let's use on-site exit surveys, for example, about 5% of their event budget goes to measurement. So those who are measuring in a solid way are spending about 5% to then find out what the 95% of their budget is doing. You definitely should have professional staffers. You need tablets, you need survey software. That's all the stuff that we do. Of course, it keeps us in business, but we also coach on how to do it yourself, because it definitely can be done. And incentivizing, what we typically do is we'll do, before the pandemic, a $5 Starbucks gift card was sufficient, depending on the length of your survey. Now it's like $10 gift cards. But you can also do drawings, so at the end of the survey, they opt in with their email address to participate in the drawing, things like that. So there's definitely flexibility, but incentivizing is definitely good. Not necessary, but good.
Joe, Maria asked on this question, what are your thoughts on using QR codes for these surveys?
QR codes are good. They do have things you have to be careful about. And the reason I say this is by experience. So they're amazing, right? Scan a QR code, take a survey, enter to win, things like that. There has to be something in the end game so that they don't get through like 1 or 2 questions and then never finish the survey. So start like anything with the end in mind. So if you do have like, a QR code, scan the QR code, complete a survey, enter to win, whatever. They have to complete the survey in order to be eligible for the drawing. Or even if they get a digital gift card, where everyone gets something instead of it just being a drawing. Keep length in mind for a DIY or self-administered survey that they're going to do on their own device. Also, make sure the questions are relatively short that can be answered on their, personal mobile device versus like an iPad or something that has a slightly larger screen. We do QR code surveys a lot for like session evaluations or keynotes. So at the end of a session, QR code pops up, you scan it, but it's like 3 or 4 questions. Rate the session overall, rate the speaker, rate their knowledge, presentation skills, things like that. But for like a booth exit survey, if you want to get into all the categories we talked about before, just be careful that there could be a high drop-off rate.
Quick and easy. I mean, I think that's in general for for everybody, you know what I mean? When it comes to most things, people want brevity, so if you can, maybe it's just one question, Joe, now that we're talking about, maybe it's like you asked, like you said, you have a point of view statement or something that you're making and say like on a scale 1 to 10, how much you agree with this or how much, you know what I mean? If you can do 1 or 2 and, just keep it brief. I think that's important for most people don't want to spend, too much time.
Yeah. I mean, it's a good point. Like the net promoter score question, which most of us have seen, whether we know it's called net promoter score or not, but it's that question. You fly with United, you rent from Avis, you shop at Walgreens. How likely would you be to recommend ... to a business friend or to a friend or colleague? That's net promoter score. It has that 0 through 10 rating. It's not a 1 through 5 for it to be a true NPS or net promoter score. But that's like, if you're going to ask that one question, that's one we see a lot. That's like a good brand type question.
Joe, from a strategic standpoint, right? Where do you feel like a lot of exhibitors are missing? Where do you feel like a lot of event marketers who run trade show programs, where do they really miss? And maybe it's not in data specifically. Maybe it's on the show floor. Maybe it's with booth build. Maybe it's with, pre-show marketing, post-show marketing, follow-up, You and I had a whole discussion about, are you treating your trade shows like campaigns? Like, where do you think people are missing?
Yeah, I do. Excuse me. I do think it's just that kind of like strategic campaign perspective. Excuse me. So, I think a lot of us, we get caught up in the tactics of like, we have to check all the boxes that we did everything because we're so inundated with all the things we have to do and the number of events we have to get done and set up and all that and then move on to the next, that we sometimes don't have time to think about that whole strategic approach. So I do think like it's sort of like if when you're new at a job and you're so into it and you're overzealous about like, I want to do all of these things, and then you get caught up in the day-to-day and we don't have time to like be as excited and overzealous. I think it's like taking that step back to say, okay, what are we trying to accomplish here? How are we going to accomplish it? And then how are we going to measure the outcome? So it's like those 3 things. And now under those 3 things, there's hundreds of things. But it's like, if you just say out of each of those 3 things, what are we trying to accomplish? How are we doing it? What are the outcomes? Pick 2 or 3 milestone moments or data points that you can say, we accomplished what we set out to do based on these 3 or 4 or 5 important data points. I mean, I know it's easier said than done, but
yeah, no, I mean, I think everything's easier said than done, essentially, right? But I always encourage on this show all the time. I hope we have real event marketers who are listening, and we certainly have a few who write to us and ask things. So it's like, my thought is like, push the boundaries, ask the questions. If you don't have an executive team that's pushing this stuff, go to them and ask. Should we be doing this? Don't you think we should know this? Don't you think we should be aligned with sales? Don't you think we should have a plan that lines up with business objectives? Like, why don't we? Why do we go to this show? Does this booth work? Do you guys like it? Do you know what I mean? Like, just start asking. And I'm a believer that it's a path to promotion town, as my friend Pablo says. And like, if it's not, then you're probably working at the wrong company. You know what I mean? Maybe you need a better boss or something. I don't know. But I think you should be curious in that space.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely right. I know just from my experience of having seen it for years, those who ask those kinds of questions, I
Mhm.
mean, those are like brilliant questions to be asking that, and then what happens too is sometimes even if we've been in our company for too long, we did ask those questions, but it was like 12 years ago and we never
Yeah.
refreshed those answers. And so we just think we know what we're doing. And because one time a while ago we addressed it, but didn't, take a refresh on it. So the other thing is, looking at your program collectively, other than just like one off, one off, one off, one off, to say collectively, here's the contribution of our event marketing program to our brand, to our ROI, to our revenue, not just
You know,
trying to get it done.
I do. What also makes me think is I've had a lot of event marketers that work for brands on this show. I had Debbie Kemp from Canon Medical Systems, Sonia Murphy, Erin McElroy. She works for IBM. And I mean, the conversation with all of them is different, but the same. They are treating their stuff like campaigns. They do know their audience. They are looking at data. They are strategically doing things, creating an exhibit, running the show from the way they have conversations to the way they engage to the way they navigate people. It's like, I just firmly believe that, like, if you're designing your trade show booths and going to trade shows and spending hundreds of thousands of dollars, if not millions, and you're not doing things this way, or your exhibit partner is not pushing you to do things this way, you have to stop and start to reevaluate what you're actually doing, because there's
Yeah.
so much more out there, per se. This is kind of like a two-part question, so hopefully I don't screw this up. But for exhibitors, Joe, right? How can they use data to, number one, better understand their target audience? Because I think that's always a big thing. You got to know your audience. You got to know your customers. And then the second part is improve. How can they use the data to improve their lead generation and follow-up?
Okay. So let's start with the first part.
Okay.
Okay. So yeah, understand the audience. So this is where, you really do have to put a little effort and work in. And also just like, let's use medical shows as an example, because they're the easiest example. So let's say you go to an oncology show. You're exhibiting in an oncology show. So it's an oncology show. So that means 100% of the attendees are oncologists. Absolutely not. You've got support staff and administrative staff and nurses and students and all these people that aren't oncologists, but they are in the oncology ecosystem. So then you start thinking to yourself, everyone just wants to meet with the HCPs, the healthcare professionals, and the docs and things like that. So are the docs going to the show floor? Are they there for their CMEs and credits and things like that? So it's like understanding really break it down. So understanding the true audience breakdown, talk to the show organizer, understand those different messages that are going to go to the different types of people, different message to a doctor, to a nurse, to a student, right? They're all important to our businesses. Some are influencers, some are decision makers. So whether you're a technology company, a manufacturing company, a scientific company, a medical company, it's like the principles still apply. So you really do have to take the time to understand the audience. Start with understanding by asking the show organizer, and push them beyond the prospectus. Every show has a prospectus, or most shows have a prospectus that breaks down the audience at a very high level, some more detailed than others, but ask the questions. You're their customer to the show organizer. And from my experience, show organizers want to help. They're almost like, wow, you actually asked me a pretty good question that we can do some math and calculations on. And so if 50% represent your target, so that's like 10,000 people attend the show, 50% represent your target, that's 5,000. And then let's say you attract 10% of them, that's 500. So that's just like in a very, very low estimate. You should leave a show with 500 marketing qualified or sales qualified leads, because you're just saying, if we attract and engage with a tiny percentage of our target market, so start small and then grow from there. Be realistic, but because there's 10,000 people at a show, we should walk away with 2,000 leads, maybe badge scans if you're doing something wild, but they're not going to be leads necessarily. Using that information to, enhance your lead quality. Is that right? The second part of the question, Matt, was
Yeah, the
about,
second question was using data for lead gen and sort of like follow-up processes and kind of how people can amplify that process or do it better per se.
yeah. Yeah. I think the big thing is, first of all, like make sure your staff understands what the lead collection strategy is. And the reason I bring that up, because it seems like, well, of course they know to scan badges, but do they? And the reason I say that is because so many times we see that, Jane Doe working the demo counter, she sees all these customers of hers, and they're great. They have a great relationship. Her as a rep, and they're her customers. So I'm not going to scan my customers' badges because they're my customers and we know each other. But when you look at, badge scanning beyond a sales thing and look at it as a marketing thing, like MQLs, marketing qualified leads, right? So it's a touch point that you want to make sure is in your Eloqua, Marketo, MailChimp, I don't care, whatever system you use for marketing that probably connects with your CRM as well. And if you don't have that system in place, you should probably try to build it, because back to Matt's question is, how are you tracking and making sure that your leads are actually, good and nurtured and whatnot. But so it's like getting staff to understand that we're not just scanning badges for leads for sales. They're marketing touch points as part of that bigger picture. Because that way, and if like the customer probably will be like, dude, why are you scanning my badge? You know me. They're not going to be like that. They're going to be like, yeah, whatever, fine. And the reason is because, hey, I want to make sure that you're kept up to date on some of the newest content that we're going to be putting out there, that you see it first. So it's like you make it like a benefit to the people that are getting their badges scanned. But starting with training your booth staff is the number one thing, because some just don't like it. They're uncomfortable with it. The second part is, one or two qualifying questions, just something that's like those first date type questions. So when it gets into the lead system, there's some bit of qualification. And maybe it's like, did you have a conversation? Yes or no? What demo did you collect that information at? Like, were they A, B, or C subjectively, so that you could start looking at, wow, that's great. We had 1,000 badge scans and 10 of them were good. Like, that's not good, so that's, yeah.
Nice. So that's kind of a good segue into Mel asked another question. He said, Joe, if your company conducts booth staff training, I am curious about your method and your message. I want to say something on this really quickly, is I think that booth staff training is huge, number one. And the second thing is, I think for event marketers, like, you need to be the general. You need to run the show. You need to be the point guard, the quarterback, whatever you want to call it. And you need to have talking points. Joe just mentioned having like openers, questions to sort of qualify. You need to have morning meetings, all these different things. And I have seen from being on the floor, like laughable situations. I've told this story in the past. I have a friend of mine works for a huge software company, huge. If I said the name, you'd be like, yeah, got it. And he came into Orlando. They were exhibiting. I swung down to the show floor, walked the show, go pick him up to go get some dinner. And I got to the show, came over to the booth. We're talking, saying what's going on. I'm like, what's going on? I said, how's the show going? What are you doing? He just looked at me. He said, I have no idea. I said, what do you mean you have no idea? He was like, oh, I mean, they flew me in, but I've not received. I don't know if I have meetings. No, I don't know. Like he knew nothing. They're just like, oh, look, it's this, we got this sales guy. He's coming in. This is his, and no communication with marketing. That to me is a nightmare. I'm looking at a booth that all in, they're $250,000 just for this show, flight, space, booth. I mean, maybe more. That's crazy to me. So Joe, I'll let you answer the question about booth staff training, your method and message.
So my method is you threaten them. No, I'm playing. So yeah, we do like, just personally, and I don't mean this salesy or anything by any means. We do like booth staff training light. We partner with true professional booth staff training companies when it gets to be pretty heavy. It's like that stay in your lane kind of thing, know where to begin and end. And, but when it comes to booth staff training, it definitely needs to not be one and done. Okay, so we did a 1 hour call with everyone working the show, booth. We did 1 hour. We told them not to put their hands in their pockets and swing their hips and cross their arms and be weird and creepy. Again, then that's booth training. That's not booth training. That's just common sense stuff that you should put in a document and remind people every other minute. But when it comes to true booth staff training, again, it kind of goes to that, like that back to what we talked about from a campaign perspective. Why are we here? What are we trying to accomplish? How are we going to accomplish it? What's our key messages? How do we say them organically without it sounding like a marketing message that's forced and cheesy? And then how are we going to track it? So, and then role play the heck out of it. That's the most effective way to get people to like get out of their shell. But yeah, just role playing is really key. But the thing is, have messages. It's funny when Matt was talking early on about Exhibitor Live next week. In one of my sessions, we talk about like creating that booth narrative, that staff training booth narrative. And it's got to be like, it's like a very structured thing. Starts at a very high level, why we're here, who we are, what we're trying to accomplish. Some people know who you are, so you don't start there. Other people don't know who you are. I've never heard of your company, because you qualified them, right? You ask them the questions. Oh, what do you know about our business or whatever? And then they say nothing. And you say, oh, okay, high level elevator pitch. Then what do you do? And then they say, oh, well, this is my role. This is my industry. Then you tailor message to be reflective of them. Notice you haven't even started a demo yet, because the biggest problem when we go into booths is if we're not ignored by booth staff, they just go right into product demo mode. And it's like, whoa. Like, you don't even know if I'm a competitor. You don't know why I'm here. You didn't ask me jack. Like, just ask me 1 or 2 questions to make this relevant, a good use of both of our time. So it's that, just those couple of qualifiers, basic training stuff, do the role playing. Don't ask yes, no questions, ask open-ended questions that get people comfortable about talking. Most people love talking. They don't like listening as much, right? So with that said, I'm going to stop talking. No, but the point is like, yeah, those questions, it's just a key part of training and messages.
I like we said about role playing. Actually, shameless plug, Sunday night in Louisville, we're throwing a like unofficial kickoff party. I think it's going to kind of run into the end of the EDPA event, but it's after it at Against the Grain. And we're having one of the keynotes, JD, I always mess up his last name, Gershbein. I got to talk to him about that, but he, and we're doing at our event. It's all about network. It's a networking event about networking. We're going to role play. We're going to talk about like, when someone says, what do you do? How are you going to answer? What's that pitch? What's, if you have a booth space, what's your differentiator? How does it tie into your theme? Like those type of things. Cause I think it is so important, the language in the booth and, those conversations and the way things work. It's extremely valuable.
Yeah. And the thing is too, what we've also seen is like, some companies or some exhibit managers or whatever, they just assume everyone knows it because they've been working booths before. Like, oh, that's our A team. They're at every show and whatever. And that's great, because a lot of booth staff are awesome when they know the person, when it's their customer. But when they're put in that position of engaging people that they don't know, it's 180 degrees different. And sometimes they really suck at it, and they're just but the thing is, it's not their fault. They weren't trained. Maybe they weren't even told that they have to do it. And it's just really just that really clear communication of why we're here and what we're trying to accomplish. And sometimes it's just overlooked because we think it's so obvious.
Joe, do you think that goes back to what you were talking about earlier about message and narrative? Meaning like, there is a why that you're there. There is an audience that you're trying to appeal to. You should have a message and narrative. I mean, that's got to tie in, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. And, like I said before, it's the less talking, more listening, the better. So those narrative messages should be real short and direct and to the point. And maybe they should elicit questions and concerns. So the person says, oh, tell me more about that, right? Like, so let them kind of let it sell itself sort of thing versus that demo where like, you're sitting there for 10 minutes, like, oh my God, is this person ever going to stop talking about this product that I'm not even interested in? And I'm trying to be nice and not just walk away in the middle of it.
Yeah, I've seen that quite a bit. All right, we're getting up on the hour here, and I like to be mindful of people's time on the hour. So, Joe, kind of some final question here and a half, but essentially, you have any success stories you can tell us? Obviously, some stuff you do is confidential, with companies' data, but give us some success stories of maybe time you've used data, implemented and given strategy. So someone's gone and executed, it's worked out. Any kind of success story.
Yeah, great question. I love this actually. Yeah, so one that comes to mind. This was at a pretty decent size exhibit at CES. They had some major demos going on and some more technical demos going on. And in one of the major demos, which a big investment was put into, it just was it was fun, but it wasn't like teaching what the technology was that was being demoed. And so you could see it by just observing, just standing out and looking in, but we also were doing an exit survey. So we were measuring, demos visited, value of information received, and then agreement with the key messages, as I mentioned before. And the agreement with the key messages that at that one demo, the agreement scores were really low compared to all the other major demos. So we realized, that we had if they rated something poorly, we asked on an open-ended basis and qualitative feedback, what's the reason for your rating? And people were like, oh, it's cool. But they were like, yeah, I don't know what the technology was that they were demoing. So we literally, at the end of day one, before day two started, we had this data. We pulled together the team that was working at that demo. We re-strategized around, working in the technology part of why this is so cool into the conversation in a very organic way. So it wasn't like an engineer talking about it. It was like a crowd gather, exciting brand ambassador talking about it. By the end of day two, the scores shot up, significantly increased. So it's just a perfect example of using data to fix something before it's too late or repeating it.
And that's kind of full circle on what we talked about in the beginning of this, which is making adjustments. Using data to make adjustments. You know what I mean? That's really cool. Joe, I try to end my podcasts and my shows the same way with the same question. I'm always fascinated by people's answers, but sometimes I forget in the live show. So I'm doing my best not to. What is advice to your younger self?
Get out. No, I'm playing. Yeah, I think it's just, just listen and take it all in and don't be scared of making mistakes. Just try stuff and don't be scared of it, but do it with a purpose, not just oh, I've got money to spend and, budget and everything, but just really think things through. Some people don't really get strategy. And I was taught strategy, true strategy when I was younger. So I was very fortunate that way, but just really think it through. Don't be scared of mistakes, but most importantly, own your mistake. And don't sweep it under the rug. You get so much more respect when you own your mistakes.
Nice, Joe. I like the stuff that you guys are doing. I'm not like a data nerd, but I do enjoy looking at it, right? And I do enjoy it being applied to strategy. And I think a big piece of what you all have done and are doing is really vital to the trade show and the event industry. So it's been an absolute pleasure having you on the show.
Thank you, Matt. I really appreciate you inviting me to be here. And thanks.
And you'll be back on.
Yeah.
You'll be back on right away. We're going to have you at Exhibitor Live in our booth. We're going to be running this live and recording podcast there. So you're coming back on to talk more.
Right.
Awesome. Thank you, everybody. As always, that's a wrap for Event Marketing Redefined. We appreciate you showing up, taking time from your day, and we will see you next time. Have a good day. Thank you so much. Thanks, Joe.
Thanks.